Your brain has several different ways of storing information in memory, each with its own purpose. So first, let's start with sensory memory, which is just a register of all the information that your senses are taking in. So sensory memory is divided into two main parts: the iconic sensory memory, which holds visual information, and the echoic part of sensory memory, which holds auditory information. Sensory memory can hold a lot of information, but not for very long. So iconic memory, even though it's really detailed for a short period of time, only lasts less than a few tenths of a second. Echoic memory lasts a little longer. It lasts about 3 or 4 seconds. So when you tune out of a conversation and your friend gets upset that you're not listening, you can thank echoic memory for helping you remember the last thing that they actually said. Now, the reason that sensory memory doesn't last very long is because we're constantly being bombarded with information from our senses, so sensory memory is constantly updating. Whatever we decide to pay attention to gets passed along into working memory, which is just the information that we are working on or processing at the moment. Working memory is sometimes also called short-term memory, but we're going to stick with working memory because that's what most psychologists call it. Working memory has a bigger capacity than sensory memory. Just remember the magic number 7, because working memory can hold 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information at any given moment. Now this number will vary a little bit based on how complicated the pieces of information are or how old you are, but generally it's right around 7. And just like sensory memory, working memory is divided into multiple parts. So we have the phonological loop, which holds any verbal information, whether it's written or spoken. So when you're trying to remember a poem that you read or thinking about the lyrics to your favorite song, that's the phonological loop. You also have a visual spatial sketch pad. And what that does is process any visual or spatial information. So when you're trying to remember what a painting looks like or the layout of a new city, your visual spatial sketch pad is at work. Now sometimes though, you have to use both verbal and visual information, such as when you're maybe in a new city, you're trying to learn landmarks as well as street names, as well as a visual representation. And so that's when your central executive steps in and coordinates the efforts of the phonological loop and the visuospatial sketchpad. So after the central executive does that, it creates an integrated representation, which is stored in the episodic buffer, which helps pass it along to long-term memory. So long-term memory is where we put information that we want to store permanently. And just like the other parts of memory storage, long-term memory is divided into multiple components. So we have explicit, which is also called declarative memory, and we have implicit, which is also called non-declarative memory. And then explicit memory is further divided into semantic memory and episodic memory. So semantic memory is memory for facts. So if you're trying to remember all the bones in the human body, or state capitals, or anything like that, anything that's just facts, that's semantic memory. Episodic memory is memory for specific events. So when you're remembering, what you did at your last birthday party and the event of eating breakfast this morning, that's in your episodic memory. Implicit memory is actually memory you're not consciously aware of, but it still helps you perform different tasks. So for example, You might not be able to explicitly explain how to ride a bicycle. You might not remember the first time you ever did ride one. But if you had to, provided you ever learned in the first place, if you had to jump on and ride a bicycle, you'd probably be able to do that because of your implicit memory. And riding a bicycle is a special type of implicit memory called procedural memory. One thing about long-term memory is that its capacity is actually unlimited. So even though sometimes it's hard to retrieve information out of long-term memory, which we cover in another video, your brain never actually gets too full for more information.